Today we're going to be looking back at Looney Tunes Space Race. So this is a kart racer that originally came out on the Dreamcast, right?
It did, yeah. It actually started on the Dreamcast, and then it got ported over to the PlayStation 2.
Oh, okay, interesting. So a listener actually reached out to us wanting to know more about this game, how it was received back then, and also, like, more importantly, how does it hold up today?
Right. Yeah, so it's interesting to see how those two perspectives kind of come together.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we just jump right in and start with that IGN review? So it sounds like they were pretty impressed by the visuals.
They were, yeah. They especially highlighted the cel-shaded graphics.
Oh, yeah.
You know how the game, they said it does a great job of convincing us that these cartoon personalities have come to life, which, back then, that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Like, cel shading itself was still kind of new.
Yeah, it was that technique of trying to make 3D graphics look more like a cartoon.
Exactly.
Like, for example, Jet Set Radio.
Yeah, that was another game that really showcased that style around the same time.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So I'm curious, though, like, how did Looney Tunes Space Race use cel shading? Like, did it really push the boundaries of what was possible back then, or was it more about just, like, faithfully recreating the Looney Tunes look?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, the review doesn't get too deep into the technical side of things.
Oh, okay.
But considering they praised it so much for the visuals, it probably did a pretty good job of capturing that, classic Looney Tunes charm.
Right, yeah.
And we also have to think about, like, the hardware limitations back then.
Yeah, for sure.
Early 3D games were still kind of figuring out how to best represent characters and environments.
Yeah, they were kind of clunky looking.
And cel shading was a way to get around some of those limitations while still keeping a unique style.
Right, okay, so visually the game seems like it was on point.
Yeah, it seems like they nailed it.
But what about the actual gameplay? Like, how did the game feel to play?
Well, the review actually mentioned how intuitive the handling system was.
Oh, that's good.
Easy to pick up and play.
Yeah.
Which probably made it really appealing to a younger audience.
Right, because kart racers, that's usually their target demographic.
Yeah, for sure. They also said that the 4-player mode gets pretty hectic.
Oh, I bet.
With everyone trying to grab that first place.
I was going to say, speaking of the 4-player mode, like, how did it compare to other multiplayer games back then? Did it have any, unique mechanics or modes that made it stand out?
That's a good point. The review does mention a time trial mode and an event mode,
Okay.
where you have special rules and objectives.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't really go into much detail about, how those modes were different from just the standard racing.
Right, yeah.
It does mention, though, that the PS2 version had a tournament mode,
Okay.
which sounds a lot like what we see in modern kart racers like Mario Kart.
Yeah, like a bracket system.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the game offered a decent amount of content, at least for back then.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But of course, there were some criticisms, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the main ones was the lack of distinction between characters.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
So basically, the reviewer pointed out that choosing, say, Bugs Bunny over Daffy Duck didn't really change the way your kart handled.
Oh, okay.
Like, there wasn't any difference in performance.
So it was all purely cosmetic.
Exactly, which is a valid criticism, especially in a kart racer, because part of the fun is that character variety.
Yeah, you want each Looney Tune to have their own, quirks and advantages.
Right, exactly.
Was that something that was common in kart racers back then, or was it more of a specific issue with Looney Tunes Space Race?
It's tough to say for sure without looking at other kart racers from that time. But it's possible that, the technology and the design philosophies back then played a role.
Yeah, like, remember those early 3D games? They often prioritized, accessibility over having really complex mechanics.
Exactly. And that might have extended to character design as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, don't forget, this was still the early days of 3D gaming.
Yeah, for sure. They were still experimenting and figuring things out.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a game that looks great, easy to pick up and play, but maybe falls short in terms of character variety.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Now, what about the track design? What did they have to say about that?
Well, the review mentioned that while the tracks themselves were well structured, the obstacles and the turns felt kind of repetitive.
Oh, okay.
Across different stages.
I wonder if that was like a limitation of the technology back then or just a deliberate design choice.
That's a good question. I mean, think about other early 3D games, even outside of racing games.
Yeah.
Were they known for having, super varied level design?
No, not really.
Not really, right?
No, it's true.
A lot of them used like modular assets.
Right.
You know, they'd create a bunch of basic building blocks and then just arrange them in different ways to make levels.
Yeah.
And that could definitely lead to a sense of repetition.
Right.
Especially if those assets weren't like super diverse.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's fascinating how like those early design choices were influenced by the technology, but also, you know, just like their understanding of 3D game design was still evolving.
Definitely.
So, to recap, we have a game that looks great, it's easy to pick up and play, but maybe falls short in terms of character variety and the track design being a little repetitive.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus.
So that brings us to that big question from our listener, right?
Yeah.
Like, how would this game fare in today's world?
Right. I mean, think about it. Modern kart racers are packed with content. They've got deep customization. You've got complex online features.
Yeah, like Crash Team Racing,
Yeah.
Nitro Fueled,
Yeah.
or like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They have unique characters with special abilities, diverse track designs, you know, like they're pushing the boundaries of what's possible in this genre.
Exactly. And that's where Looney Tunes Space Race might struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
Because its simple arcade-style gameplay might not have the same appeal to today's gamers.
Right, because they're used to more, I guess, like you said, like depth and nuance.
Yeah, they expect a richer experience overall.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It is interesting how, like, gaming tastes have changed over time.
It is. Yeah.
Like, what was once cutting edge can now feel kind of dated, you know?
Yeah.
But there's also something to be said for simplicity, right? Like, do you think there's still a place for that kind of pick up and play experience in today's world?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got all these modern games that are so complex and overwhelming.
Yeah, they're a lot.
Yeah, like sometimes you just want something that's easy to understand and fun to play, you know?
Right, right.
So there's definitely a charm to that.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it's about finding the right balance, right?
I think so.
Like a game that can offer depth for those who want it, but also accessibility for those who just want something more straightforward.
Yeah, and that's a challenge that a lot of developers are facing today. Like
Okay.
how to appeal to a wide range of players without compromising the core gameplay.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
So, like, where do you think Looney Tunes Space Race would fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Like, would its charm and its simplicity be enough to make it stand out? Or would it just get kind of lost in the shuffle?
I think it really depends on how it's presented.
Okay.
Like if it was marketed as a retro experience,
Okay.
you know, a throwback to simpler times,
Yeah.
it could definitely find an audience.
Right, like people who are looking for that nostalgia factor.
Exactly, or people who just want a more casual racing experience.
Right, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's definitely market for those retro games and remasters.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I could see a re-release of this game doing well.
Yeah, it could appeal to people who remember it fondly or even people who are just curious to see how kart racers have evolved. But I think to really succeed, it would need more than just nostalgia.
Okay.
It would need to offer something unique.
Like what?
Something that sets it apart from both modern kart racers and other retro games. Maybe a focus on that unique Looney Tunes humor and personality.
Yeah, like really leaning into what makes those characters so special.
Exactly. Instead of trying to compete on like pure mechanics,
Yeah.
it could focus on delivering a fun and chaotic multiplayer experience.
Right, like really embracing what made the original game unique in the first place.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Now, before we get too carried away with all these like hypothetical re-releases,
Right.
let's bring it back to the IGN review for a second.
Okay.
There was one thing that really stuck out to me, something that's definitely a product of its time.
What's that?
They mentioned using ACME tokens to unlock content.
Oh, yeah. The ACME tokens.
Those were like the in-game currency, right?
Yeah, you'd earn them by playing the game, and then you could use them to unlock characters and other bonuses.
Yeah. And this was, of course, like way before microtransactions and season passes.
Oh, yeah. Way before.
It's interesting to see how the whole concept of unlocking content has changed.
Yeah, it has changed a lot.
Like back then, it was more about skill and dedication, you know?
Yeah, you had to put in the work to get those rewards.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think there's any chance we'll see a return to that kind of system in modern games?
It's hard to say. I mean, there's definitely a certain satisfaction to earning rewards through gameplay,
Right.
but the current model of microtransactions and DLC is so deeply ingrained in the industry now.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine it going away completely.
It would be interesting to see a modern game experiment with a more old school approach, though.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Maybe as an alternative to the current system.
Yeah, something to think about. But I think that's a discussion for another time.
Agreed.
For now, I think we should move on to the second part of our deep dive,
Sounds good.
where we'll explore that request for a 2024 perspective on Looney Tunes Space Race.
I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, picking up where we left off. Let's talk about that 2024 perspective. You know, that listener who wanted to know how the game holds up today.
Right.
It's like we have a time traveler giving us their opinion.
I know. It's crazy how much gaming has changed, right?
Totally. Like someone playing games in 2024 has so many options.
And kart racing especially.
Yeah.
Like Crash Team Racing. Nitro Fueled.
Oh, yeah.
Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They set a high bar.
They do, yeah. The gameplay, the visuals, all that.
It's a completely different experience.
And that's the thing. Someone playing Looney Tunes Space Race for the first time in 2024,
Right.
they'd be coming at it from a different world.
Totally. They're used to intricate tracks, all those mechanics.
Deep customization.
Right, exactly. So how do you think they'd react to a game like Looney Tunes Space Race with its simpler mechanics? And maybe the repetitive tracks?
It all comes down to expectations, doesn't it?
I guess so.
Some players might love the simplicity, like a breath of fresh air compared to all those complex games.
Right.
But others might feel like it's lacking something.
Not enough depth.
Yeah.
And we got to consider the visuals too, right?
Oh, definitely.
Gaming graphics have come a long way.
Big time.
Cell shading might still look cool, but
It's not going to be the same.
compared to modern games.
No way.
And what about online play?
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Modern kart racers have those huge online modes,
Massive multiplayer.
people competing all over the world.
Looney Tunes. Space Race was mostly local.
Yeah, just playing with friends on the couch.
A totally different experience.
And for a lot of players today, online is everything.
It's about community, you know?
Yeah.
Social interaction
Oh,
and new content all the time.
so to someone in 2024, Looney Tunes Space Race would probably seem like, well,
A relic of the past?
yeah, kinda. But that doesn't mean it's bad.
No, not at all.
It's a part of gaming history.
shows us how far we've come.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that sometimes simple is good.
Oh, absolutely.
Not every game needs to be super complicated.
Sometimes you just want pure fun.
Looney Tunes seems to get that.
It does, yeah.
It's interesting to imagine how a modern audience would react to some of its features.
Like what?
Remember those ACME tokens?
Oh, yeah. For unlocking stuff.
In today's world of microtransactions,
It's a totally different approach.
players might actually appreciate it.
I think so.
Imagine a kart racer today that didn't have microtransactions.
Wow, that's a thought.
Just rewards based on playing the game.
It goes against the trend.
It does, yeah.
But some players would love it.
Yeah, I think so. Too many games feel like they're nickel and diming you. People are getting tired of it.
There's definitely a movement towards more rewarding systems.
So even though Looney Tunes Space Race might not hold up perfectly in 2024.
It makes you think
Yeah,
about how the industry has changed.